The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the campus courtyard when Ethan Walker heard the commotion. 3 wealthy fraternity boys had cornered a young woman near the fountain, their laughter echoing off the brick buildings like broken glass. "Come on, Grace, don't be such a prude," one of them sneered, grabbing her arm as textbooks scattered across the pavement. Ethan had seen enough bullies in his 35 years, in Afghanistan, in high school hallways, and now apparently in college courtyards. His military-trained instincts kicked in before his teacher's caution could stop him. Within seconds, he was there, his presence alone enough to make the boys step back. The girl looked up at him with startling green eyes that held more secrets than any 22-year-old should carry. What Ethan didn't know was that Grace Morgan had been waiting her whole life for someone to see her as just Grace. Ethan Walker's day began at 5:30 every morning with the same routine that had kept him sane since Sarah's death 2 years ago. Coffee first, black and strong enough to cut through the fog of another restless night. Then 20 minutes reviewing lesson plans for his physical education classes at Whitmore University, followed by a quick check on Tommy, his 9-year-old son who still slept with Sarah's old stuffed rabbit clutched against his chest. The drive to campus took exactly 18 minutes in his 15-year-old Honda Civic, a car that had seen better decades but still got him where he needed to go. Ethan had learned to find satisfaction in simple reliability after losing so much that had seemed permanent. His leg, damaged by an IED outside Kandahar. His wife, taken by a drunk driver on a Tuesday evening when she was simply driving home from the grocery store. His certainty that the world made sense or followed any kind of fair rules. But teaching had given him something to hold on to. These college kids, with their designer workout clothes and casual assumptions about the future, reminded him that life continued forward even after everything fell apart. Most of them were decent enough, just young and unaware of how quickly everything could change. It was his last class of the day when he first saw Grace Morgan, though he didn't know her name then. She stood in the back of the group during orientation, wearing basic athletic clothes that looked new and expensive, but understated. Unlike most of his students, she listened when he spoke instead of checking her phone or whispering to friends. "Physical fitness for non-athletes," Ethan announced to the assembled group. "I know most of you are here because it's a requirement. That's fine. My job is to help you develop habits that might actually serve you after graduation." A few students exchanged glances at his directness, but the dark-haired girl in the back nodded slightly, as if his approach made sense to her. "We'll cover basic fitness principles, some self-defense techniques, and general wellness concepts. Nothing that will interfere with your real studies." He paused, scanning the group. "Any questions? Will there be a lot of running?" asked a blonde girl whose workout outfit probably cost more than Ethan's monthly grocery budget. "Some, but we'll work up to it gradually." His eyes found the dark-haired girl again. Something about her careful attention reminded him of his better students, the ones who understood that learning happened everywhere, not just in traditional classrooms. The semester fell into its rhythm. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 a.m., 23 students learning to move their bodies with intention rather than just occupying space. Most adapted well enough, though Ethan could tell that several had never done anything more athletic than walking to their cars. Grace Morgan, he learned her name from the roster, proved to be exactly what he had suspected. Intelligent, focused, and surprisingly willing to work hard, despite having no apparent natural athleticism. She asked thoughtful questions, and actually seemed to care about improving rather than just getting through the requirement. "Ms. Morgan," he said after a particularly challenging self-defense session, "could I speak with you for a moment?" She approached his desk with the careful posture of someone accustomed to adult conversations. Most of his students still carried themselves like teenagers, but Grace had a self-possession that seemed older than her years. "You're struggling with the defensive techniques," he observed. not because you don't understand them, but because you're holding back. In a real situation, hesitation could be dangerous. Grace's cheeks flushed slightly. I've never been very physical. My background is more academic. Physical skills can be learned, Ethan said gently, but confidence has to come from within. You strike me as someone who doesn't lack confidence in other areas of your life. Something flickered across her expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. You're right. I suppose I'm just not used to situations where thinking my way through isn't enough. Would you be interested in some additional practice? I hold office hours on Wednesdays for students who want extra help. Grace hesitated for just a moment. That would be very helpful. Thank you. As she gathered her things and left, Ethan found himself wondering about her story. There was something in her careful speech patterns and unconscious bearing that suggested money, but also something guarded, as if she were used to people wanting things from her. Wednesday afternoon arrived grey and cold, with the kind of November weather that made the empty gymnasium feel cavernous. Grace arrived precisely at 4, wearing comfortable clothes and carrying a water bottle, ready to work. Let's start with basic stance and balance, Ethan said, moving to the center of the mat. The foundation of effective self-defense isn't strength or speed, it's stability and awareness. For the next hour, he guided Grace through fundamental techniques, correcting her posture and helping her find her center of gravity. She was a quick learner when she stopped overthinking, and Ethan found himself genuinely enjoying the teaching process. Better, he said, as she successfully executed a defensive move. You're starting to trust your instincts. My instincts aren't usually oriented toward physical confrontation, Grace said, slightly out of breath. What are they usually oriented toward? She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. Problem solving, analysis, finding solutions that work for everyone involved. That's not a bad approach to self-defense either, Ethan observed. The best outcome is usually avoiding the fight altogether. Something in Grace's expression suggested this resonated with her personal philosophy. Have you had to use these skills often? Outside of teaching, I mean. Ethan considered how much to share. In the military, yes. As a civilian, hopefully never again. But knowing you can protect yourself provides a kind of peace of mind that's hard to achieve otherwise. You were in the military. Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan. He kept his tone neutral, neither proud nor apologetic. It taught me a lot about what matters and what doesn't. Grace studied his face with obvious curiosity. What matters? People you care about, being useful, doing the right thing even when it's difficult. Ethan realized he was sharing more than he typically did with students. Simple things mostly. Simple things can be the hardest to achieve, Grace said quietly. Something in her tone suggested personal experience with that particular truth, and Ethan found himself wanting to ask questions he had no right to ask. Instead, he glanced at the clock and noticed their hour was nearly up. That's enough for today. You're making real progress. Mr. Walker, Grace said as she gathered her things. Thank you, not just for the instruction, but for treating me like a real person instead of just another student fulfilling a requirement. The comment struck Ethan as oddly specific, as if Grace were accustomed to being treated as something other than a real person. But before he could respond, she was already heading for the door. As November progressed, their Wednesday sessions became the highlight of Ethan's week. Grace proved to be not just a dedicated student, but engaging company. She asked thoughtful questions about his teaching philosophy, listened with genuine interest when he talked about Tommy, and somehow made him feel like his perspective on things actually mattered. More concerning, Ethan was beginning to look forward to seeing her with an intensity that had nothing to do with his professional responsibilities. Dad? Tommy's voice interrupted his thoughts one evening as they worked on homework at the kitchen table. You've been weird lately. Weird how? Ethan asked, looking up from the papers he was grading. Happy weird. Like you're thinking about something good. Tommy studied his father with the perceptiveness that had worried Ethan since the boy was very small. Is it a girl? Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. What makes you ask that? Because you get the same expression Mrs. Patterson gets when she talks about her boyfriend from the senior center. Tommy's logic was unassailable. And you've been humming while you make dinner. I don't hum. You've been humming, Tommy said firmly. So is it a girl? Ethan sighed, recognizing defeat. There's a student in one of my classes who's interesting to talk to. Is she pretty? Tommy. Dad, I'm 9, not stupid. Is she pretty? Yes, she's pretty, but more importantly, she's smart and kind. Ethan set down his pen, giving his son full attention. But she's also my student, which makes everything complicated. Tommy considered this seriously. Because of rules? Because of rules. And because she's probably going to graduate and move on to bigger and better things than small-town college professors. Are you a small-town college professor? Tommy asked. I thought you were just Dad. The simple statement hit Ethan with unexpected force. In Tommy's world, his father wasn't defined by professional limitations or social status. He was just Dad, which was apparently enough. You're right, Ethan said quietly. I'm just Dad. So maybe she likes just Dad, Tommy suggested with 9-year-old logic. Maybe she doesn't care about the other stuff. As Ethan helped Tommy finish his math homework, he found himself hoping his son might be right. But experience had taught him that hope was a luxury he couldn't afford when it came to relationships that seemed too good to be true. December arrived with a cold snap that made the campus feel smaller and more intimate. Grace had become a regular fixture in Ethan's Wednesday routine, and their conversations had evolved beyond self-defense instruction into something that felt dangerously close to friendship. My son wants to meet you, Ethan said one afternoon as they finished their session. The admission had escaped before he could stop it. Grace looked surprised. Your son knows about me. He's very observant for a 9-year-old. He's noticed that I've been happier lately. Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks at the admission. I'd like to meet him, Grace said simply, if that would be appropriate. The word appropriate hung between them, loaded with all the boundaries they had been carefully navigating. Student and teacher, 22 and 35. Whatever world Grace came from, and the simple life Ethan had built with Tommy. There's a bookstore downtown that Tommy loves, Ethan said carefully. We go there most Saturday afternoons, if you happen to be there. I love bookstores, Grace said, and her smile was the first completely unguarded expression he had seen from her. Saturday afternoon found Grace standing outside chapter and verse books, checking her reflection in the window and wondering what she was doing. For months, she had been living a carefully constructed double life, and now she was about to meet the most important person in Ethan Walker's world. Through the window, she could see them at a small table in the cafe area. Tommy was smaller than she had expected, with sandy brown hair and his father's serious dark eyes. He was bent over what appeared to be homework, while Ethan read a newspaper nearby. Taking a deep breath, Grace pushed open the door and made her way through the maze of bookshelves. Tommy, Ethan said as she approached. I'd like you to meet my friend Grace. Tommy looked up from his homework with the evaluating gaze of a child who had learned to be careful about new adults. Grace found herself being studied with an intensity that reminded her strongly of his father. Hello, Tommy, she said, settling into the empty chair across from him. Your dad tells me you're reading the Narnia books. I'm on the horse and his boy, Tommy replied cautiously. It's good, but not as good as the lion, the witch, and the wardrobe. I agree, Grace said seriously, though I always liked the Voyage of the Dawn Treader best. Tommy's expression brightened considerably. That one's next on my list. For the next hour, Grace found herself genuinely enjoying Tommy's company. He was articulate and thoughtful, with the kind of emotional intelligence that spoke to careful nurturing. When he had trouble with his math homework, Grace showed him shortcuts that made the problems flow more smoothly. You're good at explaining things, Tommy observed. Most adults just tell you the answer instead of helping you figure it out. I like figuring things out, Grace said. It's more satisfying than just being told what to think. As they prepared to leave the bookstore, Tommy turned to Grace with the kind of direct question that only children could ask. Are you going to keep coming around? The question hung in the air between the three of them, loaded with hopes and fears that none of them were quite ready to voice. I'd like that very much, Grace said finally. If it's okay with your dad. It's okay with me, Ethan said quietly. But as they walked to their cars, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that she was building something precious on a foundation of lies. Because eventually, Ethan and Tommy would want to know more about her life. And when that moment came, Grace wasn't sure if the woman they discovered would be someone worth keeping around. Christmas break arrived with a week of snow that transformed the campus into something magical. Grace had been spending more time with Ethan and Tommy, joining them for homework sessions and quiet dinners that felt more like home than anything she had experienced in her previous life. But the fantasy was about to collide with reality in ways Grace hadn't anticipated. She was leaving the library on a Tuesday evening when she noticed Marcus Webb standing by her car. Her father's head of security looked as polished and implacable as ever, and his presence could only mean one thing. Miss Morgan, Marcus said politely. Your father would like to see you. I'm in the middle of finals, Marcus, Grace said, though she knew it was futile. Whatever it is can wait until next week. I'm afraid it can't, Marcus replied. There's been a situation with the company. Your father needs you in the office immediately. Grace's heart sank. In William Morgan's vocabulary, situation usually meant something that could threaten the family business. And when that happened, all other considerations became secondary to damage control. 5 minutes, Grace said. Let me get my things. But as she walked back toward the library to collect her bag, Grace realized that 5 minutes wasn't going to be enough time to explain to anyone why she was disappearing. She thought about calling Ethan, but how could she possibly summarize 22 years of carefully omitted truth in a phone call? Instead, she texted him a simple message. Family emergency. Will call when I can. As she rode in silence toward downtown, Grace stared out at the city lights and tried to prepare herself for whatever crisis awaited. But mostly, she thought about the expression on Ethan's face when he had said her name, and wondered if she was about to lose the best thing that had ever happened to her. The 52nd floor of Morgan Technologies felt like stepping into a different universe. Grace's heels clicked against polished marble as Marcus escorted her through corridors of understated power toward her father's corner office. Grace. William Morgan stood behind his desk, his expression grim. We have a problem. He handed her a tablet displaying that morning's Wall Street Journal. The headline made Grace's stomach drop. Morgan Technologies under federal investigation for antitrust violations. How bad? Grace asked, scanning the article. Bad enough that our stock price has dropped 15% since the markets opened. William said. Bad enough that the board is demanding answers, and I need family involved in our legal defense. Grace set down the tablet, understanding immediately what her father was asking. I'm still in law school, which is why I want you to graduate early and join our legal team, William said. This company represents 4 generations of Morgan legacy, Grace. Everything you have, everything you are, exists because of what this family has built. The weight of generational expectation settled on Grace's shoulders like a familiar burden. This was the conversation she had been avoiding all semester. "I have commitments at school," Grace said carefully. "People who are counting on me." What people could possibly be more important than 40,000 employees and their families? The question revealed everything Grace needed to know about how her father viewed the world. People mattered in proportion to their economic significance. Relationships were valuable based on their utility to the company. "People who care about me for who I am rather than what I represent," Grace said quietly. William's expression grew concerned. "Grace, exactly who have you been spending time with at that university?" Grace felt the walls of her carefully constructed double life closing in. "I've been tutoring a student, a child who's been having difficulties." "A child?" William's tone suggested he found this incomprehensible. "Grace, what exactly have you been doing?" "I've been learning who I am when I'm not a Morgan," Grace said, surprising herself with her honesty. The silence that followed was so complete, Grace could hear the distant hum of traffic 52 floors below. When William finally spoke, his voice carried a note of disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "Grace, you are a Morgan. That's not something you can set aside when it becomes inconvenient. What if being a Morgan means becoming someone I don't want to be? Then you become that person anyway," William said firmly. "Because that's what responsibility means." Grace looked at her father and realized they were having 2 completely different conversations. He was talking about duty and legacy and corporate responsibility. She was talking about love and authenticity and the possibility of building a life that mattered on human rather than economic terms. "I need time to think," Grace said finally. "You have until Monday," William replied. "The board meeting is Tuesday, and I need to know whether I can count on your full commitment." As Grace left the building, she realized she was facing the most important decision of her life. Choose the family legacy and lose everything that had made her happy, or choose love and walk away from everything she had been raised to believe mattered. The question was, which choice required more courage? Grace spent the weekend walking campus paths that had become sacred to her, but her mind kept returning to the crushing weight of her father's expectations. She had watched William Morgan navigate corporate crises her entire life, had seen him make decisions that affected thousands of jobs with the kind of cold calculation that built empires. The truth she had never admitted to anyone, not even herself, was that she didn't possess that particular brand of ruthlessness. When she imagined herself in that corner office, making decisions that could destroy careers or communities for the sake of profit margins, something inside her recoiled. She wasn't built for that world. She lacked the killer instinct that had made her father successful, the ability to see people as assets rather than individuals. Every time she tried to imagine herself wielding that kind of power, she thought about Tommy's earnest questions about fairness, about Ethan's quiet integrity, about all the students in her law classes who wanted to use their degrees to help rather than exploit. Sunday evening, she made her choice. Not just because she loved Ethan and Tommy, but because she finally admitted she would be a terrible CEO. The company deserved better leadership than someone who went weak at the thought of layoffs and hostile takeovers. Monday morning, Grace walked into her father's office wearing jeans and a simple sweater, carrying a worn copy of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. "I've made my decision," she said, settling into the chair across from William's desk. "And?" "I'm declining your offer to join the legal defense team. I'm going to finish law school on my original timeline and then use my degree to help people who actually need it." William's expression shifted from expectation to disbelief. Grace, you're making a mistake. Maybe, Grace said, but it's my mistake to make. And honestly, Dad, I don't think I'm cut out for your world. I don't have what it takes to make the kind of decisions that built this company. What are you talking about? You're brilliant. You're educated. I'm soft, Grace interrupted. I care too much about individual people to be effective at corporate strategy. I would be a disaster as CEO, and you know it. William was quiet for a long moment, and Grace could see him processing this unexpected self-awareness from his daughter. And what about the company? What about 40,000 employees? The company needs to face this investigation with honesty and integrity, Grace said. If we've violated antitrust laws, then we need to accept responsibility and make changes, and it needs leadership from someone who actually wants the job and has the stomach for it. That's idealistic nonsense. That's the difference between us, Dad. You see idealism as weakness. I see it as the only thing that makes success worthwhile. But more importantly, I see my own limitations clearly enough to know I'm not the right person for this. Grace stood to leave, feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. She had just walked away from a guaranteed future of wealth and influence in favor of uncertainty and love. I hope you know what you're doing, Grace. I hope so too, Grace said. But for the first time in my life, I'm making a choice based on what I believe is right. As Grace drove back to campus, she felt like she was emerging from a tunnel she hadn't realized she was in. The choice had been terrifying, but also liberating. She was finally free to become whoever she was meant to be. But first, she had to tell Ethan and Tommy the truth about who she had been. Grace found Ethan in his office, grading papers with his usual methodical attention. He looked up as she knocked, relief and concern warring in his expression. Grace, I was worried when you disappeared. Can we talk? She asked, stepping inside and closing the door. Privately? Ethan set down his pen, giving her his full attention. What's wrong? Grace took a breath, knowing that her next words would change everything between them. There are things about me that I haven't told you. Important things. What kind of things? My full name is Grace Elizabeth Morgan. My father is William Morgan, CEO of Morgan Technologies. The silence that followed felt endless. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Morgan Technologies, the company that's been all over the news? Yes. Ethan leaned back in his chair, processing this information. So when you said you were a law student? That part is true. Everything I've told you about myself is true, just incomplete. Incomplete, Ethan repeated. For months I've been involved with the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the country, and you considered that information incomplete? Grace felt tears threatening. I wasn't trying to deceive you. I was trying to be someone normal for once in my life. And what exactly do you represent, Grace? Apparently, I represent $1 billion corporation and 4 generations of family legacy. Grace said bitterly. I represent everything except my own choices. Ethan studied her carefully. Is that why you're telling me this now? Because your family obligations are calling you back. My father wanted me to choose the family business over everything else. Over you, over Tommy, over the life we've been building. Grace met his eyes directly. I chose you. What does that mean? It means I walked away from a guaranteed future to pursue something that might not work out. It means I told my father that I learned more about leadership from you and Tommy than I ever learned in corporate boardrooms. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, and Grace could see him working through implications she hadn't even considered. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Grace, I need you to understand something. I'm a high school teacher who drives a 15-year-old Honda and shops at discount stores. My biggest financial worry is whether I can afford Tommy's school supplies each semester." He paused, studying her face. "What I'm about to ask might sound harsh, but I need to know the answer." Grace felt her heart rate accelerate. "What? Are you in love with me? Or are you in love with the idea of me?" Ethan's voice was gentle but direct. "Because there's a difference between loving someone and being fascinated by a lifestyle you've never experienced." The question hit Grace like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I represent everything your world isn't. Simple, uncomplicated, poor." Ethan's expression was pained but determined. "I need to know that you're not just experimenting with normal life, that I'm not some kind of authenticity project for you." Grace opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. Was there truth in what he was saying? Had part of her attraction to Ethan been the novelty of someone who wanted nothing from her except her company? "I understand why you'd think that," she said carefully. "And I can't prove it's not true except by choosing to build a life with you. But Ethan, when I think about my future, I don't see corporate boardrooms or charity galas. I see Saturday mornings at the bookstore with Tommy. I see helping with homework and attending school plays and falling asleep next to someone who values me for who I am rather than what I represent." "And what happens when the novelty wears off?" Ethan asked quietly. "What happens when you realize that my salary means we'll never travel to Europe, that we'll shop at thrift stores and drive used cars and worry about every major expense?" The questions forced Grace to confront realities she had been avoiding. Life with Ethan would mean genuine financial constraints, would mean giving up luxuries she had never even thought to appreciate, because they had always been available. "Then we'll figure it out together," Grace said. "Ethan, I'm not naive about what I'm choosing. I know what your life looks like, and I want to be part of it, not because it's quaint or interesting, but because it's real in ways my previous life never was." "Grace," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "I've been poor most of my adult life. I know what it means to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. Are you really prepared for that reality?" "Are you prepared to find out?" Grace asked. "Because I think we both need to stop trying to protect each other from this relationship and start figuring out if it can actually work." Ethan studied her for what felt like forever. "You're right. But Grace, if we do this, if we really commit to building something together, I need to know that you're choosing me because you love me, not because you're running away from something else." "I love you," Grace said firmly. "I love your integrity and your kindness and the way you see the best in everyone, especially Tommy. I love that you measure success by the positive impact you have rather than the money you make. And yes, I'm also running away from a life that would have made me miserable. Both things can be true." Something in Ethan's expression shifted, the careful guard he had been maintaining finally beginning to lower. "Grace Morgan, are you asking me to marry you?" The question caught her off guard, but Grace realized the answer had been building for months. "I'm asking you to let me prove that this isn't a phase or an experiment. I'm asking you to trust that what I feel for you is real enough to build a future on." Grace thought about all the elaborate proposals she had witnessed in her parents' social circle, performances designed to impress rather than expressions of genuine feeling. Then she looked at this man who was offering her everything that mattered in the simplest way possible. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want to build that life with you." When Ethan kissed her, it was with the passion of someone who no longer had to hold back. Grace melted into his embrace, feeling like she had finally come home. They were interrupted by slow clapping from the doorway. Grace turned to see Tommy standing there, grinning widely. "About time," he said with satisfaction. "I was starting to think you guys would never figure it out." 3 months later, Grace graduated from law school and began working for the County Public Defender's Office at a salary that was exactly 1/10 of what her father's company had offered her. Her first case involved defending a single mother charged with shoplifting baby formula, and Grace found more satisfaction in that work than she had ever found in corporate law seminars. The adjustment to Ethan's world proved both easier and harder than she had anticipated. Easier because the emotional rewards of genuine relationships far outweighed any material sacrifices. Harder because she sometimes caught herself missing small luxuries she had never thought to appreciate. The freedom to buy books without checking prices, the ability to help when Tommy needed something expensive for school without having to budget for it. But watching Ethan's face when she proved she could live within their means, seeing his gradual acceptance that her love was genuine rather than experimental, made every adjustment worthwhile. Her father attended the graduation ceremony, sitting in the back with an expression Grace couldn't quite read. They had spoken only twice since her decision, conversations that were polite but strained with everything left unsaid. The wedding was small, just Tommy, Mrs. Patterson, and a few close friends. Grace wore a simple white dress she had bought at a department store, and Ethan wore his best suit with a tie Tommy had helped him choose. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to build a life based on love, integrity, and it saw mutual support. As they walked out of the chapel together, Tommy between them holding both their hands, Grace felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked quietly, as they paused on the steps. Grace looked at her new husband, at the boy who had become her son, at the future they were building together on love rather than inheritance. "Only one," she said seriously. Both Ethan and Tommy looked at her with concern. "I regret that it took me 22 years to figure out that I was never cut out for my father's world anyway. I should have trusted myself to know what I actually wanted instead of trying to force myself into a mold that never fit." Tommy squeezed her hand. "But you figured it out eventually, and now you're exactly where you're supposed to be." "When did you get so wise?" Grace asked, leaning down to kiss the top of his head. "I learned from the best," Tommy said, grinning up at both of them. As they walked toward their new life together, Grace Morgan Walker finally understood the difference between choosing love because it was easy and choosing love because it was right. She had found her family, her purpose, and most importantly, herself. And for the first time in her life, that was more than enough.